Hello, my most amazing artists. Second and third grade, I'm so happy to have you back here for another video. Today, we're going to be going over another activity from the Learning in Place packet. We're going to be doing activity number 1, which is drawing trees. So the theme of this packet is nature. So I want you to maybe take a peek outside or look at some pictures in books or online of some different types of trees and just think of the different types of trees that you know. I can name a lot just off the top of my head. There are palm trees, fir trees, maple trees, pine trees, oak trees, and they all have different types of leaves and different types of shapes. So we're going to draw a few different types of trees, just make a couple of little sketches, and we'll outline in marker to make them look more finished. So I would just suggest you grab a couple of pieces of paper or your sketchbook so that we can draw some different types of trees. Now, I like trees a lot and I have a lot of them in my yard. And so before I made this video, I took a look at the trees out there. And so I'm going to start with my paper in a sort of, well, I was going to do a vertical format, but the way I have my camera, I'm afraid that you won't be able to see everything. So I'm going to do it horizontally, but you can do your paper vertically, however you like. But there are some basic things that every tree has. And of course, the first is the trunk. That's the main body of the tree. Most trees have branches. Those are like the arms. Not every tree has a branch though, or their branches might look a little bit different than what we think of when we think of trees. And then finally, trees have leaves, and their leaves may look different. They might look like needles, like a pine needle. They might look like fronds, like on a palm tree, or they might be leaves like what we think of and that fall down in the fall and we can jump in a pile of them. So first of all, let's draw a very basic tree. We'll draw an oak tree. So an oak tree usually has a big, thick trunk. Now, when you're drawing a tree, you might make it sort of curve toward the bottom because the roots, which are like the feet of the tree, reach into the ground. So sometimes the roots go kind of out. So I like to draw the bottom of my trees having a curve. And I'm drawing very lightly with my pencil. So there's my trunk. And then my branches will go out. Now with a oak tree, the branches are usually kind of hidden by the leaves, and the leaves sort of create this classic tree shape. It almost looks like a big cloud on top of the tree. So this is sort of a very simple classic oak tree style. Now I want to erase my marks here. So I've made this sort of oak tree. Now oak trees have sort of rough bark, so you can do some little lines to create the bark of the tree. Maybe your tree has a hole in it. Sometimes, we'll see pictures of trees that have holes in it and it has, say there's a little squirrel living inside, using my imagination here. Now, underneath the leaves, of course, the branches will be going out, but you won't be able to see those because they're hidden by all of those leaves. So there's just a very basic tree, an oak tree. Finish my bark. Maybe it even has a little branch coming off here. You never know, might have a little branch coming off. So there's my oak tree. Another type of tree that we see a lot of, especially in Virginia, is a pine tree. So pine trees are tall and skinny, and their leaves are high up, and their leaves are actually called needles. So pine trees have branches that go off to the sides like this, and branches sort of split up into smaller little twigs. And now pine trees usually have bunches of needles. You can draw a bunch of needles and they're like in little bursts. So you'll do your little clumps of pine needles. And sometimes at the center of those little bursts, you'll see pine cones. And pine cones actually are what carry the seeds of a pine tree so that they can continue growing. My pine tree, I'm going to make my pine tree go all the way up and off of my page because it's so big. And pine trees have sort of these big pieces of bark that overlap. They're like big ovals almost. Have you ever seen that before? The big pieces of pine tree, like little layers, and they can peel apart. So I'm going to draw some ovals even on my branches to make my pine tree. So there's my pine tree. Maybe I'll make a little branch here with some needles. So there's a couple of different types of trees. I'm going to flip my paper over and I'm going to think about some other types of trees. Now, we have a fir tree. A fir tree is an evergreen tree. There are a lot of different types of fir trees, but we have them for our Christmas trees. So, they typically have sort of a triangular shape. And we're just going to make this shape really lightly because we're going to make it look a little more detailed. But you can start with a soft, light triangle, and they have a small trunk down here at the bottom. Now, fir trees usually are kind of layered, and they're made up of needles because they're in the same family as a pine tree. So I like to do the layers like this. And just do these light little lines. And that makes us have our little fir tree. That's a pretty good one, right? And then we also have a palm tree. Palm trees, now fir trees you usually see in, you think of cold weather or cold environments. But for a palm tree, we think of a warm, sunny, tropical environment. Now a palm tree has a sort of curving trunk. This is because a lot of times palm trees are found on beaches and shores and tropical areas where there's a lot of hurricanes and windy weather. So they have these bendy trunks so that they can sway without breaking. So they have their trunk. And now they, instead of having regular leaves, they have what are called fronds. A frond is like a big leaf. It has a big branch in the middle. And then it has all of these little, it's almost shaped like a feather coming off of the frond. Now, sometimes we'll see people draw it and they'll do this. That looks a little bit stiff. And if we do a soft line and have all of the fronds go in one direction like a feather, it'll look a lot more natural. So you just use your light pencil lines and you do some overlapping. That means that the lines will touch and go over each other. It's much more natural looking. And again, they have these types of branches and leaves so that the wind can go through it instead of breaking it whenever there's a hurricane. You know, you think of Florida and palm trees, and Florida, that's actually where I'm from, has lots of these, especially down in South Florida. So there's our palm tree. And now palm trees, their bark usually goes in layers. So you can draw layers. And don't just do a straight line across. Do a curved line because the trunk of the palm tree is round like a cylinder, like this paint thing. So instead of a straight line across, you'll actually have it go round, sort of like this label and these lines. And sometimes they have little spiky bark up here at the top and center where the fronds come out. So there's 4 types of trees: oak tree, pine tree, fir tree, and palm tree. So there are some different types of trees that you can draw. And then, of course, in order to make your drawing feel more complete, you can always take a marker. It doesn't have to be black. I sometimes like the black marker to outline. Carefully following the outside of your pencil marks. This is called following the contour. Tracing along, and of course for something like this you don't have to trace every single little line. You can just do this poofy shape again, and I'm actually going to fill in some of the space here with some more leaf texture. I'm going to outline my little hole, carefully outline my squirrel, maybe do some very light lines for my bark. So there's my oak tree. And now I'm going to outline my pine tree. And again, it kind of goes out at the bottom here to show that it has roots. Because if a tree doesn't have roots, it can't stand up. So you have to make sure you draw your bottom to show that there are roots under the ground. You don't have to draw the roots because they go into the ground. But this makes it stand up better. Now, drawing my pine cones. And then my needles. And this might be something that you can take a green marker, if I can find it, and do like this. And again, very lightly take my marker, fill in my bark texture, my ovals. And when I color over this with crayon later, it'll actually look really nice and more complete than if I just did it in pencil. So there's my pine tree. Now I'm going to flip it over and I'm going to do my fir tree. And actually I'm going to take green to do my fir tree. And I'm going to use my light lines here. And I'm not going to worry too much about being perfect, because remember, we're just exploring and having fun. So very light. Notice I'm moving my arm like this. I'm not just doing my hand, but I'm doing my whole arm, moving lightly here to draw my fir tree. And it's funny that even though it's spelled F-I-R, you can remember that it's soft and fluffy like fur, F-U-R, like on an animal. That's something, kind of a neat way to remember it. I'll draw my trunk. And I can do some little lines for the bark. And then my palm tree. Taking my marker, tracing my trunk. Drawing the little spiky things where the fronds come out in the bark. Tracing along the lines of the trunk. And again, it doesn't have to be perfect because bark is very rough and has a texture to it. So if my lines are a little jagged and wavy, it just looks more realistic. Taking my green and tracing my palm fronds. Again, using my light, quick movements with my marker to make it look more believable, more real. Notice how my whole hand and wrist are moving, quick and light. But you don't have to be quick. You could also go slow. This is something that takes practice. So if you want to practice carefully tracing, ooh, I smudged it, but it actually looks cool. Carefully tracing, you can do that too. Turning my paper so that I can reach at a better angle. You can always try that. That's a nice drawing trick, is turning your paper. This tropical island scene, this palm tree makes me wish I was out on the beach. It'll be nice whenever the beach is open and we can all go and enjoy the summer, right? As it is, I have a hammock in my backyard. I might bust out the hammock and pretend that I'm on a desert island. All right, so there are my trees. Now, if I want to, I can color these. I have some crayons nearby. I can take this brown and color over my marker area. And see, I don't even really have to erase my pencil marks here because the crayon and the marker combine to cover them up. This brown is actually the perfect color for a pine tree. There's my pine tree. It looks just like one to me. And let's see, I want to find a nice bright green for this oak tree. This is called Mountain Meadow. So I'm going to color, ooh, I like that because oak trees usually have these really shiny dark green leaves. So when you're in a big open space that you're coloring in, you can color big and fast. Leaving the edges to where you can work a little more carefully, filling in the space without scribbling all over the place. Again, turning my paper so that I can draw and color more easily. So there's my oak top, and I'm going to look for a different brown. There's a burnt sienna. So this is going to be like sort of a light brown. Oh, that's a good color. And I'm going to use it to color in my tree trunk. And notice how my marker lines make the bark look more realistic. Gives it some texture. And there's my oak tree. Now, I have my fir tree. I want to do some green. I have a glittery green. I think that'll look cool. Take my glittery green, and I'm sort of doing these same movements that I did when I was creating the texture of the fir tree. So I'm just swiping the crayon back and forth in sort of a curve, making my fir tree texture. And I'll take a brown, I'll do this brown color again, and color in the trunk. And there's my fir tree. And then my palm tree, I want to do a different brown for that because their trunks are usually sort of a light brown. Let's see if I can find one. This is called mahogany. That's actually a type of wood, not a palm tree wood, but it is a type of wood. And I'm going to color in the trunk. Color in the bark where the fronds come out. And I don't need to color the fronds because they're already green. And then palm trees usually are in the sand, right? So maybe I'll take this goldenrod color and create some sand for it to be in. Fir trees are usually in the snow, maybe. So I'll do this. There's some snow. pine trees, you know, they're just in normal Virginia. So maybe some grass. And same thing with an oak tree. Maybe it's in the grass, maybe it's in the long grass. You can do long grass by just making some scribbly lines. And doesn't that look like long grass now? So there we go. There's some different types of trees you see in nature. Pine tree, which is an evergreen tree, stays green year round. Oak, which is actually also an evergreen tree, though they do drop their leaves sometimes. Have a fir tree, another evergreen, and then a palm tree, which they do drop their fronds throughout the year. So the tropical tree, this one is in a more temperate or cool area. And these are in our climate, a normal sort of, almost any climate. You can find them in the north, you can find them in the south, all around. So I can't wait to see what kinds of trees you guys explore and create. You could even do a scene, a landscape full of trees if you like. You can also think about what kind of animals you might see on the trees, squirrels, birds. You know, a palm tree might have a crab crawling around underneath it. A fir tree might have an owl roosting in it. So just when you're creating your trees, think about the kinds of environments that you would see them in. And I hope you enjoyed this little drawing tutorial. Let me know if you have any questions, and I look forward to seeing what you do. All right, guys, stay creative.